This is a unique meeting. I never, kind of a different feeling. You have to get used to it. It's not like seeing people in person, but I know that you're there, and I welcome all of you to this Hadassah event. And we have two speakers who are going to talk about COVID-19 and its impact on their lives. And also, I believe that there'll be pointing towards a silver lining. It's been a very difficult time for all of us. And it appears that something is going to happen to break the COVID chain. I'm going to introduce our first speaker, who is Linda Freedman Block. And she was immediate past president of the Southwest region of Hadassah. And now, after finishing that, she became the chairman of the National Keepers of the Gate, which is a major giving organization. She's no stranger to Israel. She's been there 31 times. Two of her sons and daughters-in-law live in Israel with their 6 grandchildren. And she has been there at least twice a year for the past 6 years. With the grandkids started coming, the grandkids started coming. She also has granddaughters in Houston, her friends, her Judaism, Israel, and Hadassah. Linda was in Israel last December and hasn't been back since because of COVID-19, which is certainly an aspect of its impact on people who don't live in Israel. Although I'm sure it's impacting on them too, in its way. Linda also points to her background as a writer, publisher, and editor in a general and she calls herself generally super creative, and I don't blame her for tooting her horn. She and her business partner wrote Noah's Ark newspaper for Jewish children for 16 years, and that must have been a wonderful experience. And you're asking me if this is helpful. It certainly has been. And so I'm going to pull out and allow you to give your presentation.
Thanks, Debbie. Well, first of all, I'm just really glad to be here with everybody today. This is exciting. So how's it feel to be watched? Because the whole world's been watching us. They're all watching Hadassah Hospital to see what we're doing as we're in the forefront of research and treatment at Hadassah Hospital. We are the designated hospital in Jerusalem, designated to treat the corona patients, and we have been plenty busy. Having our somewhat empty round building, that's the original hospital that was built in Ain Kerem in 1961, was actually a blessing. It's a silver lining to have a rundown building. It was only empty because it's 59 years old and in desperate need of renovation. And that's why we are in the middle of our 360 Degrees of Healing campaign right now. When the virus came to Israel, our staff went to work immediately, converted an empty floor in the round building into a corona unit, and then they had to convert another floor into an ICU corona unit for those who needed ICU care. We were lucky to have a separate building available to us. The Sarah Wetzman Davidson Tower, which is our state-of-the-art hospital with 500 beds, was on the same campus at Ain Kerem. That's the neighborhood in Jerusalem. They did not have to have any corona patients in that building who might accidentally pass the virus on to others. As the number of patients grew, so did our floors. We went from 1 to 2, and then 3 to 4 to 5, and then 6. Right now we're using fewer than 6, so that's a good thing. We are all consumed with corona information, and we have to be because this virus can kill you. This past week, we had more than 75 million cases worldwide with more than 1,670,000 deaths. That's roughly 2.2% of all the people worldwide who got it who have passed away. In Israel, as of 2 days ago, this is Friday the 18th, they've had over 368,000 cases and over 3,050 people have passed away. It's terribly sad, but that is just 0.82%, 4/5 of 1% who have passed away. So we are saving more lives than the worldwide average. Israel has been super strict with lockdowns and quarantines. I know. Our 4-year-old grandson in Jerusalem was exposed to the virus last week in his preschool by a visitor from the zoo. Right this minute, our daughter-in-law, she's going a little crazy, but our daughter-in-law is confined to one bedroom in their home with our 2.5-year-old granddaughter and 4-year-old grandson. And while our son and our 6-year-old granddaughter are in the rest of the house. All the food preparation is being done by our son Jordan. He brings the food, leaves it outside the door, walks away. Then they get the food and they leave the dirty dishes outside the door. So that's affecting our family like so many others. Our children and grandchildren who live in a front have been also in quarantine. It's pretty upsetting to hear a 2-year-old grandchild tell you, we're in Bidood, Nanny. Bidood is quarantine. It kills me that he even has the word in his vocabulary. Israel was the first country in the world to get out of that first wave of the virus. And not such good news, we were the first in the world to have a second wave. And good news, first to get out of the second wave. But that second wave occurred because they went back to regular life without restrictions. But everyone banded together at Hadassah Hospital to make the best facility possible. Nurses and doctors were recruited from different departments to work night shifts and do morning rounds. All of a sudden, ophthalmologists needed to be trained to intubate patients. That is definitely not something they ever planned to do in their career. For 2 solid months, we had 150 corona patients every single day. And sadly, Israel entered a third wave of the virus on just a few weeks ago, December the 1st. The patients there are being treated with 3 main things. 2 are medicines, and the third is from plasma from patients who have already recovered from the virus. At Hadassah, every doctor is a researcher. They are also amazing innovators. They've developed a brand new treatment that is proving to be very successful. They've developed a method to flood the sick or infected cells with millions of dying cells that are killing off the COVID cells. They did that treatment on 5 really sick patients who were in ICU. 4 of the 5 went home from ICU in 4 days. The 5th one took a little longer. And then they treated another group of 4 patients. So far, the results have been very successful. So this looks like it's going to be a standard protocol used there. We've developed new techniques like the one I just mentioned for treating the very worst cases. While the rest of the world was understandably stressed about not having enough ventilators, one of our doctors came up with a brainstorm. He called the CEO of SodaStream. That's the Israeli company that created a canister that carbonates water, so you have soft drinks basically with a push of a button. Anyway, so he picked up the phone, called the company and said, I'd like to speak to the CEO, please. And all of a sudden he's talking to the CEO, and they put their heads together and they created an inexpensive ventilator that can be produced for about $15,000. And it's called Stream O2. Basically, with pressure, it pushes the oxygen in through the nose. So it's working, it's inexpensive, and it's terrific. The machine called Stream O2, they have the blueprint for it, but we didn't sell that blueprint to make money. We shared it with the world for free because that's who we are, and that's what we are all about, saving lives. That blueprint, by the way, has been downloaded over 40,000 times. And that's not all. Everybody's been praying for a vaccine that would be developed as soon as possible. There were more than 150 companies worldwide who were working on vaccines. The vaccines were given to healthy volunteers and thank heavens are now being distributed. And as of tomorrow, December 31st, the vaccine will be available to Israelis 60 and older. I want you to know Hadassah doctors and nurses are compassionate. The isolation that a corona patient feels is incredibly depressing and can affect the patient's will to get better. We were the first hospital in the world to allow loved ones to visit. The relatives suit up like astronauts, but the patients are still able to recognize them, and it does a world of good to know that their family is there with them. Hadassah also allowed recovered patients from the virus to come and visit other patients who might not have had family. We allowed a wedding to take place recently. They set up a chuppah in the courtyard under the window of a very sick man who was the father of the bride, so he could be at his daughter's wedding. And I'm sure that actually brought a lot of joy to everybody else who could hear all the music and all the activity. The pediatric floor was turned into a bar mitzvah hall recently because we had a 13-year-old little boy, or big boy, who was becoming a bar mitzvah, and his little sister had to be hospitalized. And the family wasn't sure how they could be in two places at once. Not a problem. They converted the pediatric unit into a bar mitzvah hall, like I said, and the nurses babysat while the young man became a bar mitzvah. So that was pretty exciting. A new mother with the virus delivered her baby, and they went ahead and held the bris in the Abel Synagogue. That's where Rabbi Jan is sitting right now, I think. And right there where the Chagall windows are. And they held the bris in the Abel Synagogue. The mother, of course, did not get to attend because she was in the round building with the virus. It's like being with family when you're in Hadassah Hospital. On top of everything else, dealing with all the corona business, the doctors and nurses at the Sarah Wetzman Davidson Tower are taking care of business as usual, just like other hospitals around the world. There are hundreds and hundreds of new babies being born. The doctors are treating people who've had heart attacks and strokes, and people who've been in car accidents and other accidents. People are on dialysis and getting chemo. We haven't slowed down a bit. I'm going to stop here actually so we can hear what Dr. Zweig has got to tell us, and then I'm going to come back and I want to let you all know what you can do to help. Thanks.
Debbie, I just clicked the little unmute button for you, but you should be able to click something that lets you unmute. There you go.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay. Linda, did you want to come back and after Dr. Zweig speaks?
Yeah, let me do that. And let's hear from Dr. Zweig because I want to know what he's got to say. And then I'm going to talk to everybody about what we all can do to help.
Okay, it sounds inviting to me. Okay, I'm going to introduce Dr. Richard Zweig, who has lived in Shreveport for 29 years, and the business part of his life was as in the LSU Medical Center, Ochsner's now, and his specialty was neurology with an emphasis on Parkinson's disease. And it should be noted that Parkinson's disease victims are also vulnerable to COVID-19, and a terrible twosome to have if you have to handle both. He treats very vulnerable people, and his basic research was in the area of Parkinson's, as I said. Having these two difficulties is very difficult to treat. Besides his 29-year experience in this field, he also served as president of his congregation, I remember, not too distant past. And it's a pleasure to greet Dr. Richard Zweig as a presenter. And I think he's going to point a way to what might be a silver lining, at least the beginnings of that. So it gives me great pleasure to present Dr. Zweig.
Thank you. Let me share my screen here. I have a PowerPoint presentation, and let's see on that. You all should be seeing that. And let's see if it'll allow me to. Yeah, I called it "Protect Yourself." Not as much about research, more just about the virus and things that are interesting to me. What we can all do to stay safe. I'm not going to talk about neurology, really, although I can if there are any questions. But let me get started here. I'm going to start with just some observations. And this is very random, but this is daily. I mostly am at the medical school and I'm not at home. And I see medical students in a clinic conference room. This is in a clinic where patients are sitting next to each other without masks, eating, drinking, talking. Of course, the food was provided by a drug representative trying to sell a product, and they're there eating. Someone's calling. Residents and students seated every other chair in a lecture hall during grand rounds. That's neurology grand rounds. Again, food provided. They're every other chair, but are they 6 feet apart? Not necessarily. It's a big conference room. They're eating. Nurses and clerks, less than 6 feet distance, working at computers in a room off a patient-traveled hallway. Some with no mask. When I go to pick up my N95 mask, I've got to kind of walk. My phone's ringing. Excuse me a second. Let me get rid of this. Okay. Okay. All right. Can you all hear me okay? Okay,
Yep.
good. So
Yep.
nurses and clerks, I'm walking to pick up my mask. I've got to go to the ground floor in the hospital, and I don't really feel safe because, there are people walking around and they're no masks, or their masks don't cover their noses. I had surgery on my wrist on September 2nd, preparing for surgery, the surgeon's nurse, and then the surgeon came to my bedside as I was going to be getting the local anesthesia. No mask. The surgeon didn't wear a mask. Various workers in hospital hallways, again, masks covering the mouth only. Waiting in line with my mother-in-law to vote early in Texas, would have been in October. There's a line, people are just standing, they're not really distanced, and several people weren't wearing masks. That same day, we went into a store for something, and the grocery store clerk, more than one, mask covered the mouth only. Then, this is from an email from a community member. I've taken away names for privacy, to personalize it, but we received this email. Dear someone, I felt totally unsafe getting tested at a community testing center. I don't have any symptoms, but at the guidance of friends and professionals I know, and lots of billboards around the city, I went to get tested because I had been in the presence of someone with COVID-19 10 days ago. During the check-in process, someone walked in without a mask and spoke to one of the attendants, and the attendant said nothing. The check-in process included sitting on a chair at a table, neither of which had been wiped down since the last person sat there. When I actually went in for testing, 3 employees were in the testing area. 2 of them didn't have a mask on. And when I told them I was worried about them, they said it's okay, since I was 6 feet away from them, which I'm not sure was accurate. Now I'm a lot more worried about being exposed to COVID-19 just from getting tested than I was with my mask and distance presence around someone with COVID-19, also masked and distanced 10 days ago. Free testing should not mean unsafe testing. To me, that seems entirely counterproductive to the goal of lowering case numbers. I'm not the only person I know who has felt unsafe at a testing location here in Shreveport, but I hope that our accounts can improve this vital process. And I must tell that person to know that, in fact, this letter did make it to the people in charge, and now whether that actually changed what's being done at this particular community center, I don't know. But at least the word got out. And that's not uncommon. I have a number of slides that I've taken material from the CDC website. It's really quite good. We know that there were political issues early on, but they've really come around, and there's tremendous information. And if you have a little spare time and you want to kind of read about COVID, any question you could think of, it's there. And but there's a major caveat, in my opinion, a major caveat that we'll get to a little later. One thing that's, I think, mistaken at the website, but in any case, so from their website, some basic stuff. I know you all know this, but we'll talk about it. COVID-19 is thought to spread mainly through close contact from person to person, including between people who are physically near each other within 6 feet apart. People who are infected but do not show symptoms can also spread the virus to others. Cases of reinfection have been reported but are rare. We're still learning about how the virus spreads and the severity of illness and causes. It spreads easily from person to person. It can vary. The virus that causes COVID-19 appears to spread more efficiently than influenza, but not as efficiently as measles, which is among the most contagious viruses known to affect people. And COVID-19 most commonly spreads during close contact. People who are physically near, within 6 feet of a person with COVID-19, who have direct contact with that person, are at greatest risk of infection. When people with COVID-19 cough, sneeze, sing, or even talk, or breathe, they produce respiratory droplets They can range in size from larger, some are visible, to small droplets, and small droplets can also form particles that dry very quickly in the airstream. Infections occur mainly through exposure to droplets when a person is in close contact with someone who has the disease, or at least may not be symptomatic, but has COVID-19. Respiratory droplets can cause infections when they are inhaled or deposited on mucous membranes, such as those that line the inside of your nose and mouth. As the respiratory droplets travel farther from the person with COVID-19, the concentration decreases. Larger droplets fall out of the air due to gravity, and smaller droplets and particles spread apart in the air. And with passing time, the amount of infectious virus in respiratory droplets will also decrease. So, from the CDC, and this is a bit peculiar, there's a definition of this. COVID-19 can sometimes be spread by airborne transmission. Well, didn't we just talk about it? Well, not really. There's a specific definition here. Some infections can be spread by exposure to virus in small droplets and particles that can linger in the air for minutes to hours. These viruses may be able to infect people who are further than 6 feet away from the person who is infected, or that person has left the space. That's important. This kind of spread is referred to as airborne transmission, and it's an important way that viruses like tuberculosis, measles, and chickenpox are spread. There is evidence that under certain conditions, people with COVID-19 seem to have infected others who are more than 6 feet away. For example, in a church choir where the singers were distant. These transmissions occurred within enclosed spaces that had inadequate ventilation. Sometimes the affected people were breathing heavy, for example, while singing or exercising. Under these circumstances, scientists believe that the amount of infectious small droplets and particles produced by the people with COVID-19 became concentrated enough to spread the virus to other people. The people who were infected were in the same space during the same time or shortly after the person with COVID-19 had left. So available data indicated that it's much more common for the virus to spread through close contact with a person who's had COVID-19 than through airborne transmission, but this can occur. That is very important. So how about spread through contact with contaminated surfaces? Respiratory droplets can also land on surfaces and objects. It's possible that a person could get COVID-19 by touching a surface or object that has a virus on it and then touching their own mouth, nose, or ears. But spread through touching surfaces is not thought to be a common way that the virus spreads. So early on, right after it was announced that I'd be giving this talk, I got this question, an email from a community member. And the question was, do you think COVID-19 germs can live on the skin for any length of time, like on your hands where they would have moisture, heat, and maybe food? If so, could they reproduce there? And this was my response a few weeks ago, and I kept it. I think it's pretty much correct. The best evidence suggests that the most efficient transmission is by air, droplets or aerosol. Likely bolus size or amount matters a lot. Thus, breathing in a few particles would unlikely cause infection. Similarly, a small exposure from touching a surface with the virus would also unlikely cause infection, also requiring then touching mouth, nose, or eyes. And any virus on its surface would never reproduce. I'll say that again, any virus on its surface would never reproduce, as for viruses, unlike bacteria, infection of cells is required. These are pure parasites. They only divide in cells. So, of course, no reason not to wash your hands. Frequently, it's easy. From the CDC, these questions have not been fully answered. What is the infectious dose for COVID-19? How many virus particles or virions are required for the infection to occur? One expert on a podcast I heard guessed that 50 particles increases your odds, but that was just a guess. Do inoculum size and route of inoculation affect risk and severity? Again, we don't really know. You know, it's interesting. Since I've agreed to give this talk, I've been listening to podcast after podcast after podcast from medical experts. Some of them are very interesting. There was a really interesting talk that I listened to a few weeks ago by this fellow, Emmanuel Goldman, who's a microbiology professor at Rutgers. And what he started is said, you know, I'm a professor of microbiology, but when I come home, my wife and my mother-in-law are always telling me to wash my hands, wash my hands, wash my hands. You know, and yet I'm a microbiologist. I study these things. How important is it? And he talked about it, and he reviewed a study from the 1980s that I thought was very interesting and maybe reassuring. Rhinovirus isn't coronavirus. Rhinovirus is the most common cause of the common cold. Rhinovirus is the rhinovirus is more common than coronavirus. which is the second most common cause. Not this coronavirus, but other coronaviruses are very common causes of common cold. Anyway, the rhinovirus is a hardier virus than the coronavirus. For reasons that he explained, it would be expected to survive on surfaces even longer than coronavirus. Here was the study from the 80s. It was very interesting. What happened was the investigators took a bunch of college students or people, and they had them play poker. And they were divided between people with the cold, with the rhinovirus cold, and people without the cold. And they were encouraged to talk to each other. They didn't wear masks. They handled cards. They handled the chips. And then they saw of the people that didn't have the virus, of course, many of them got the virus. You would expect that. But then what they did was after the poker game, the investigators immediately took the cards and took the chips, and they gave them to another group of people who were in another room. None of them had the virus, and had them play poker. So they were exposed to the cards and to the chips of people who were sneezing and coughing. Not a single one of those people got the virus. So the only way they got the virus, the only ones that got the virus that were the ones that were exposed by air, not the people that held the cards and chips, or the people who had just been playing poker who had the virus. So that was reassuring to Dr. Goldman. Of course, he finished the talk by saying, of course, I washed my hands, washed your hands, but that it probably does not spread much by contact. Okay. So I just added a few slides this morning. I got into work early. There's and this is some stuff that I've just been hearing recently, which I thought was very interesting. How is viral spread determined? Well, one thing we've all heard about, of course, is contact tracing. If you find someone with the virus, who have they been exposed to? Family members, people at work, other people, and it's labor intensive, and it's, we know, often incomplete and inaccurate. People will say no, people won't participate. However, it is useful. It can provide useful information. There was a study here published in June. This was reported in CNN, where two hairstylists who had coronavirus saw 140 clients. The investigators, the people there, they tracked all of those people for at least 2 weeks, plus family members. And what they said was, but of the 140 clients, these two hairstylists had the disease. Not a single one of their clients got the infection. Why? Presumably because they were wearing masks and their clients all wore masks, and they didn't have more than one person in at a time. They were very careful about social distancing. They were very careful about wearing masks. This kind of tells us, hey, masks seem to work, at least it did in this situation. So contact tracing can, of course, be very useful. But more interesting now is I've seen a few interesting studies on genetic sequencing of the virus in selected populations. It's much more accurate, and it separates different strains. You know, we've been hearing a lot in the last day or two about this new strain in England that may be more infectious, right? And so there are concerns about travel bans and other things because of it. But what many people may not know is that this virus is mutating all of the time. There are changes all the time. And there are many, many, many different strains of virus. And what you could do is, not I can't do it, but labs can sequence the virus and determine specifically how a virus is spread. Two studies I'm going to talk about. The first was very interesting, was from a Marine Academy study from the early spring. New freshmen were arriving for basic training to the Marine Corps Academy after home quarantine for 2 weeks. They were told to strictly quarantine for 2 weeks before coming in. It was about 700 or so new students. What happened was asymptomatic transmission. On arrival, they tested everybody. About 16, which was about 1%, arrived infected, even though they had quarantined. 35 during the next 2 weeks became positive. So that's 51 total. About 2% became positive over the next 2 weeks. They did the complete virus sequence, not of all of the people, but the ones that agreed to participate in the study. About half or so participated in the study. And they looked at the virus sequence, the RNA sequence, and they identified 6 separate transmission clusters, six different viruses. And only 5 of the 51 infected recruits reported symptoms during the week prior to the first positive test. So most of the people were completely asymptomatic. And no infected recruit was identified through clinically indicated testing, despite daily temperature tests and symptom screening. In other words, no one said, I'm sick. No one had a temperature. I walk in every day, including this morning, into this office. They check my temperature. That didn't do anything. They were all identified simply by the scheduled testing. Now, I don't expect you to be able to understand this, but this is, if you're familiar with the Ancestry.com or with doing family trees, these are basically family trees that identified 1 through 6 separate strains. And students, what happened was when they came in there, they separate the students completely isolated within their platoons. So they had roommates and they had a small platoon. They did everything in the platoon, and they didn't see anybody else other than people in their platoon, with an exception that I'll mention, which I'll mention next. And you can see the date here. This starts, they got it in late February, March, April. So it was right in the beginning. And this is very interesting. The platoons were completely separated, except these 2 platoons shared a bathroom. And they shared a bathroom. What they found was that in platoon F, there was 1 strain, all the ones in pink, and the ones in black were infected but not sequenced. They didn't participate in this study, but they also had the disease. So all these people in platoon F, including some neighboring rooms, some roommates, here were roommates, they shared the 1 virus, whereas in platoon E, they shared the other virus with 1 exception. This person here got the virus that these people had, despite a shared bathroom. Now, I guess you could say it's a cup half empty or half full. You would think that if there was surface-to-surface spread, where would you imagine a virus might be spread more than in a freshman dorm bathroom? I mean, maybe they cleaned it up regularly, but I mean, people touch the sinks, they touch the bathroom, they go to the bathroom, they go into the shower, they're the handles and all of that. And yet it looks like maybe 1 person, and we don't know, and maybe 2 people could be in the bathroom at the same time. This might even have been airborne, but I don't know how big the bathroom was. But in any case, only 1 person from platoon E got the virus of platoon F. It really stayed, except for that 1 exception, isolated. Again, that also to me suggests that it's much more air than surface spread. Okay. Then there was this elegant study. I just put the title here. Let's talk about it briefly. This is by Boston. When this started, Mass General, they started sequencing everybody that they tested. Everybody who had that nasal swab at Mass General, patients, staff, they took what was left of the nasal swab and they sequenced. They're still doing it, but not everybody, but they're testing just about everybody. And what they found is that most people either didn't spread it or they spread it to 1 or 2 people. But there were a few super spreaders. And the super spread, by super spreader, they defined it as spreading it to at least 8, but often many more than 8 people. And what they described is there was a medical meeting, a scientific meeting in Boston around this time. 1 person, and this is through sequence analysis, through genetic sequence analysis, gave that virus to well over 100 other people and spread further. That was from 1 source. And whereas other people usually didn't. And they said, well, is it a different virus? Is it more virulent virus? And this doctor suggested probably not. It's just per chance. It's just the exposure. One thing that was interesting from this study is that Mass General is a premier major hospital, right? It's Harvard Medical School hospital. And they were concerned because there was, in the spring, there was an event, a period of time when there seemed to be a cluster of cases, where all of a sudden at one time there were like on a floor or something, there were a cluster of cases, and they were concerned that maybe their their infectious control system wasn't working, and maybe it spread within the hospital. So they sequenced all of the patients, and what they found out is they all had different viruses. So it didn't spread within the hospital. They all came from outside sources, from the community. So they were reassured that their program for quality control, for infection control was working, and that in fact it didn't spread. So that's a very eloquent way of us understanding spread is through this. Now, of course, not everyone can do this. Not every town, not every hospital can sequence viruses. But it is the way of really seeing how this thing is spreading. So let me go on. Back from the CDC. I thought this is interesting. Most people here have pets. COVID-19 rarely spreads between people and animals. It appears that the virus that causes the disease can spread from people to animals. In some situations, CDC is aware of a small number of pets worldwide, including cats and dogs, reported to be infected with the virus, mostly after close contact. At this time, the risk of COVID spreading from animals to people is considered to be very, very low. So this is my one, and I apologize if this offends anybody, but this is my one political slide. And I hope you'll take this with a little sense of humor. What's wrong with this picture? This was from December 10th, and it's Yoni Kempinski from Israel interviewing Loe Al-Sharif from Bahrain in Dubai. And this was at the Israel National News Arab Sheva website. And if you click on it, what you'd see is that the two men walk up to the table. They're both wearing masks. They both take off their masks and then do an 8+ minute interview. And are they 6 feet apart here? They're outside, but they're not. I doubt they're 6 feet apart here. And then during the interview, he brings the microphone right up to the face of the other guy, and they're talking back and forth. So what's wrong with this? Eretz Sheva can't be trusted to right wing. The Abraham Accords will never amount to much without implementation of a just two-state solution between Israel and the Palestinians. Or these two men should either be farther apart or wearing masks. You know? Anyway, they should have been wearing masks back in October 10th. This is from Worldometer. Here, what's interesting, this interview took place at the United Arab Emirates. I didn't know this, but if you look at the website here, the populations are almost identical. Did you know that? They both have, in fact, more people live in the UAE than in Israel. They both are over 9 million people. And Israel's had a lot more cases. This is up until December 10th, but this is current. This is this morning, 2443. This is the 7-day moving average. It's 2,443 cases per day. Lots of cases. UAE, notice this is 1250, this is 2000. So the y-axis is very different here. They have about half the number of cases now, right? 1235 today. You can see the curve here. In terms of deaths, as we heard already from Linda there, fortunately the percentage that die it's not very high. It's under 1%, but you can see here 13, and in the UAE 3. So it's still happening, and it's still spreading. So they should have been wearing masks. Anyway, going on. I like this slide because it talks about relative risk from the CDC concerning restaurants and bars. Guiding principles to keep in mind, the more an individual interacts with others and the longer that interaction, the higher the risk of COVID-19 spread. Masks may reduce the risk of spread when they are consistently used by customers and employees, especially when social distancing measures are difficult to maintain. The risk of COVID-19 spread increases in restaurants or bar settings as interactions with 6 feet or others are as described below. Many masks may reduce the risk of spread when worn in these situations. Lowest risk, food service limited to drive-through, delivery, takeout, and curbside pickup. By the way, you could do a list like this for grocery stores as well. More risk, drive-through, delivery, takeout, and curbside pickup. Emphasized, but on-site dining limited to outdoor seating. Seating capacity reduced to allow tables to be spaced 6 feet apart. A higher risk, on-site dining with indoor seating capacity reduced to allow tables to be spaced at least 6 feet apart, and or on-site dining with outdoor seating, but tables are not spaced 6 feet apart. And of course, the highest risk would be on-site dining indoors where the seating capacity isn't reduced and tables aren't distant. Where are we in Louisiana? We're in phase 2. That's the governor's phase 2. This is phase 2. This is what's allowed in Louisiana. Restaurants are open. Indoor seating is allowed. How many of you on this call have been to a restaurant within the past few months? Anyway, I mean, I'm probably talking to the, preaching to the choir here, but I don't know. I haven't been to a restaurant. Let me go on. And here's my caveat, but from the CDC, wear a mask to help protect yourself from getting or spreading COVID-19. Wear a mask with 2 or more layers to stop the spread, and wear the mask over your nose and mouth and secure it under your chin. Don't put masks on someone 2 years younger. Don't put masks on people who have trouble breathing or people who cannot remove their mask without assistance. And it says, do not wear masks intended for healthcare workers like N95. A little story here. I was in my clinic seeing patients. I had my mask on, and a person comes in with a face shield, but not a mask. The shields aren't as good as masks. And, you know, I'm not shy. I said, why aren't you wearing a mask? And he took out a letter written by a doctor saying he has asthma and he's not allowed to wear a mask because he has breathing problems. And so that's why he couldn't wear a mask. Of course, that same doctor was giving him all kinds of narcotics, I won't, you know, and which he shouldn't have been getting. And when I asked him about it, he smoked cigarettes. You know, so he can't wear a mask, but he could breathe through a cigarette. You know, that was this patient here. Anyway, my caveat, and I think it's an important caveat, is this. This is America. You know, if you want it, someone will sell it to you. If you can purchase an N95 mask being sold to the general public from a reputable source, why the heck not? This idea that N95 masks should be only given to healthcare workers, to me, is absolutely ridiculous. When we're going to talk about this, you can very easily go online and buy N95 masks. And I think you should. We're going to talk about that in a minute. So here are my masks, okay? On the left is an N95. I always wear this in the clinic unless I'm alone in the room, I'm not near others at all. That's an N95 mask. Here's a KN95 mask. I wear this in my office in the medical school where I don't see patients, where I am right now. When I'm pumping gas, walking with a friend and not always distance, when I'm around others. It's a K995. What's the difference? How are N95 masks different from KN95? The main difference lies in how the masks are certified. N95 is the US standard, and KN95 is the China standard. Because of this, only N95 masks are approved for healthcare use in the United States, even though KN95 masks have many of the same protective properties. Okay. N95 masks must pass a rigorous inspection and certification process from the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health, NIOSH, which is part of the CDC. Companies making KN95 masks, meanwhile, can seek approval from the FDA through what's so-called emergency authorization from a foreign certification, for a foreign certification, which meets the 95%, that's where the 95 comes from, 95% filtration requirement. But it doesn't have to be approved by the NIOSH. The FDA says the manufacturers of K95 masks must also provide documentation that the mask and materials used are authentic. And certification of the KN95 masks include a requirement on fit testing, which tests the air inside and outside the mask, as well as how the mask fits around the face. A little bit about how masks work and what makes an N95 mask an N95 mask. As you know, droplets come in different sizes. The larger, the more airbound, the longer they stay in the air. The very large ones will drop off in seconds, the very small ones in hours. This is shown also in this picture here. But one thing I learned from this talk is masks are filters but aren't barriers. This shows a surgical mask before and after, and these are particles after use. And notice that the particles are sticking to the fibers of the mask, even though there are lots of spaces where the particles can get through. And the reason the particles are sticking is something called van der Waals force. These are covalent, these are forces that why small things stick to each other, why a very small bug can walk upside down on a ceiling and not fall off. Without suctions, it's just hair to hair. It's just hair. It's because things that are small stick together. And when the particles come through, there's particularly the smaller particles, the very small particles will just stick to the fibers. And Brownian motion, which means the particles moving all the time, not just in one direction, but it's jiggling around. It'll touch the fiber and it'll stick. Whereas the large particles will get trapped. But what's interesting is that the intermediate sized particles sometimes get through. This shows you most masks have trouble with medium sized particles. The very small particles will stick, the larger particles will be blocked, but these intermediate sized particles, about 0.5 microns, this size particle will get through with only about a 50, at its worst, a 50% protection. What N95 does is they have at least 3 layers, are the KN95 2, some will say 5 layers, but the middle layer here is a material that's electrostatically charged. Think of the balloon attracting your hair here. It's electrostatically charged, and that will attract and will attract these intermediate sized particles. That's what turns a regular mask into an N95 mask. So that's this electrostatic attraction over here, which will pick up the intermediate sized particles. So that's how these masks work. And of course, don't wash or disinfect the mask because because then you'll lose the electrostatic property. Okay. So how do you get a KN95 mask? Well, I'm going to thank my wife Sarah's online here for getting it for us and for just showing us how to do this. you have an Amazon account. If you have an Amazon account, you search for N95 mask EUA, that's emergency use authorization. You click on Amazon Prime and 4 stars and up. These are just customer reviews, and you get a whole bunch of masks. And here's some of them, and there you see the price, you see how many, and the ratings. And the one we used is this one. It's sort of random. It wasn't so expensive. You get 10 masks for $25. So it's $2.50 a mask. It's called the PowerCom. But if you want to check with the FDA site, which you can do, about whether the FDA has approved it, you don't look up PowerCom. You look up Guangzhou, which is the city where it's made. PowerCom. You got to do a little bit of searching, and you can find it. You can prove at the FDA that it has gotten this emergency use authorization. And there are loads and loads of these available for sale. Again, K95 is from China. Loads of them available for sale with reviews. How good are they? Well, you don't really know, but you might want to, for extra safety, consider wearing a cloth, this is cut off, but a cloth mask over the lightweight N95. And for extra safety, you could do it or for a message. Go Hadassah, Am Yisrael Hi. Whatever you want to sound it, there's no reason not to wear this lightweight mask with maybe a cloth mask over it. And of course, to protect your eyes, wear a glass shield. These where glasses are considered a face shield, that protects the eyes because that is a membrane that if you get through. But buyer beware, it's almost impossible to confirm that the product is a counterfeit. I mean, they're made in China. They do submit paperwork. It meets the Chinese standard. It may be very good, but you don't necessarily know what you're getting. If you want to wear one of these and a mask over it, by all means. I have mine right here. You see? The one I use. This one here. Anyway, going on. For the latest, and it's not really the latest, but to me it's the latest, and this isn't unique. There are a bunch of these, this is called the ENVO mask. It's a reusable N95 respirator mask used in trades, industrial environments, and many other NIOSH rated applications. It is approved by NIOSH, that is by the CDC. And it's manufactured by SleepNet Corporation, a worldwide leader in sleep apnea. Remember, people who have sleep apnea and CPAP, they wear masks all the time. It's made in Hampton, New Hampshire. It's American made. And it's an N95, a real N95, and anybody could buy it. Cost of the mask, $79. It's not as cheap, but then you get with it individually wrapped filters. This has one of these vents here. You think, oh, you can't use vents, and a lot of the industrial N95 masks with a vent will protect the person, but when you breathe out, stuff can get out. But this has a filter, and the filter covers this vent completely, and you get the cost of individually wrapped filters is $220 for 100 filters, so $2.20 per filter. So you could even wear one a day or one every few days if you don't want to be as careful, but that's probably okay. Anyway, we've ordered one. The website says, 7 to 10 days shipping. We ordered one a few weeks ago. Haven't gotten it yet. We called, Sarah called the company. Hey, how come we haven't gotten our masks yet? We ordered a few. And the reason was that there was a Wall Street Journal article about it, so they're back ordered. Everybody's trying to get them. Again, where there's a will, there's a way. I don't see why not wear one if you can get one, if you can afford it. I mean, it's going to work better than your cloth mask. Now, I might say that the FDA just over the past week has decided to do a better job of rating masks. Not only the N95 mask, but even the cloth masks and the different materials, the surgical masks, and really do a good job of presenting in a user-friendly way, how good masks are. It's about time. So, as we could see, we're still having a lot of disease, and I'm almost done. But as we could see that what I did here was, this is the latest buzz up today. I plugged in today's data before the talk here. What I did was I took the peak valley, and where we are currently. We don't know if this is a peak yet. It looks like it might be peaking, but hey, so did this, so did this. We don't really know. Anyway, if you compare the peak, valley, peak, valley, then you could see these are the case numbers, the number of deaths, and you can see the ratio from that first wave, 6.9% of people died. If you compare the peak here, the peak here versus the death here at 0.1, 6.9% died. This is a little later because the peak in deaths came a little after the peak in cases. It came down 2.4, 1.7, 2.0. Currently, it's at 1.2. This is 5-day average. It's at 1.2. Now, of course, we don't know where these lines are going, but it looks like we're getting better. The medical profession's getting better at treating this. It's continued to evolve and improve. I'm not going to talk about that. We actually heard a little bit about what Hadassah Hospital's doing with the treatments, but both with antiviral and anti-inflammatory medications. This is a genuine silver lining. We're learning about treating viruses. We're learning about tracking viruses with the material that I showed you before. We're learning about developing vaccines. What about vaccinations? The mRNA vaccinations, Pfizer, Moderna, are likely very safe. We've all been reading about this. I'm a doctor. I got my vaccination Wednesday morning. Yay. It hurt. My arm hurt a little bit into the next day. I had no other side effects, and maybe I'll have more side effects after the second vaccination. This is a new technology. That's mRNA vaccinations, but highly unlikely to have unexpected consequences. mRNA is fragile. It doesn't enter the cell nucleus, and thus should not be converted to DNA or become incorporated into the cells. This is human cells genome. It acts to produce the viral protein for which it codes for only a short period of time. It should be very, very safe. But it's new, so we have to be circumspect a little bit. The most common side effects reported by participants in trials were injection site pain, like I had, redness and swelling. I didn't have that, fever, headache, muscle pain, joint pains, and or fever. Typically gone within a day, not unlike what we've all had with other vaccinations. Severe allergic reactions to vaccines are very rare. The Pfizer trial excluded, I'm not sure about the Moderna trial, but the Pfizer trial specifically excluded people with a history of anaphylaxis, which I'll define in a minute. The FDA has released data indicating that less than 1%, 0.63% of participants who received the vaccine experienced what was called a serious adverse reaction, compared to 0.51% of people who received a placebo. Now, just having this bad enough to miss work the next day and reporting it, in other words, just a bad fever the next day, was included. So this doesn't include people who had, very serious, but just as they define serious adverse reactions. Anyways, 0.63% compared to 0.5% for people who just got saline. Now, from the over the past week, from the Pfizer experience, now that people are getting it, the vaccine, hundreds of thousands of people have got it now, it looks like it's a little higher. It's about 2.1% of people are having bad enough side effects to report it, to miss work the next day, fever, but still, that's what you might expect. Now, a few cases, maybe you've seen this, of Bell's palsy, that's facial weakness that's been occurred with both trials. I think it was 7 in the 2 trials and 1 in the placebo. Now, what's interesting is that the occurrence was actually less than might be expected in the general population with the number of people that participated in the trials. So we don't really know if it came from the vaccination or not. It might have, 7 versus 1, but we don't know. And you sometimes can see an allergic, an autoimmune Bell's palsy. This occurred, by the way, a month or so after the vaccination. It could happen, very small numbers. In addition, cases of transverse myelitis, which is a spinal cord inflammation, have been reported with the more traditional AstraZeneca vaccine. There were a few. In addition, 1 case of Guillain-Barré syndrome, which is a severe neuropathy, was seen with the Chinese vaccination. However, studies on the safety of the flu vaccination, this is our regular flu vaccination, have shown that for every 1 million people who receive a flu vaccine, there is 1 additional case of Guillain-Barré syndrome. Normally, in 1 million people, this is randomly, 1 million people, there would be 20 cases of Guillain-Barré. That's 2 per 100,000 or 20 per million. But if they all receive the flu vaccine, there'd be 21, 1 additional case. Now, who is that 1 person who got their Guillain-Barré from the vaccine versus 20 who would have gotten it anyway? It's not known. But because of this, how small this number is, the Guillain-Barré Society, our foundation, which is a patient advocate group, they advocate yearly flu vaccination in the fall of each year. We can, as they say, we can easily quantitate the benefits of 1 million people getting the flu vaccine in terms of deaths or hospitalization, of days off work. work, which those benefits far outweigh the very small risk in people who receive the flu vaccine. Again, one extra case for every million people. Will the same apply to the coronavirus vaccine? We don't know, maybe, probably. But, so what are the questions? How effectively will vaccination reduce transmission of COVID-19? The scientists are being very circumspect. Likely, you know, when you get the vaccination, that virus, after a few days, even me now after the one vaccination, is not going to be getting into cells and reproducing. So you might carry a little bit, you may spread it a little bit, but the likelihood is not very much. But how much? We don't know. It wasn't studied. Not really, and it's still being studied. How long will the immunity last? We don't know. There's concern that this new British mutation, remember the virus is mutating all the time, maybe of the spike protein, and maybe the vaccination won't work if the spike protein changes enough. We don't know. There are still a lot of questions. So what about anaphylaxis? It's a scary thing, or it can be. Let's talk about that briefly before we finish up. What is anaphylaxis? The first signs of anaphylaxis, which can occur with foods, with exposure to animals or pets or foods, with vaccinations, first signs might be, go back, look like a typical allergy symptoms, runny nose, skin rash, but within about 30 minutes, more serious signs appear. There could be one or more of the following: coughing, wheezing, pain, itching, tightness in your chest, fainting, dizziness, confusion, weakness, a bad rash, runny, stuffy nose, shortness of breath, trouble breathing, rapid heart rate, swollen or itchy lips or tongue, swollen or itchy throat, hoarse throat, trouble swallowing, tightness in your throat, vomiting, diarrhea, cramps, weak pulse. Some people also remember feeling a sense of doom right before the attack. You can die from an anaphylactic reaction. But epinephrine is the most effective treatment. That's the EpiPen. It works right away, and the shot can be given right away. And it's completely reversible if it's recognized and treated. Now, how about anaphylaxis with this virus? The CDC 1 week ago said people who have experienced severe reactions to prior vaccines or injectable drugs can still get the Pfizer vaccine, but you discuss the risk with your doctors and be monitored for 30 minutes afterwards. When I got my vaccination, they said, you know, wait in this room for half an hour before you leave, and that's what they were doing here in my medical school. The guidance is a shift from a proposal the day earlier. This came out of England that would have recommended against vaccinations for this group of people. During a webinar with physicians, the CDC official said patients with a history of severe reactions should take precautions because from in the initial use of the drug, of the vaccination, 2 documented cases in British healthcare workers who were reported. I just updated this today. As many as 5 additional cases. This is in addition to the 2, so maybe there have been 7, 3 in Alaska, 2 others. So it's a pretty small number. Lots of people have already gotten the vaccination, but it's something to watch for. And the quote from the medical officer from the CDC, people that do report those types of reactions to other vaccines or injectables, they can still get the vaccine, but they should be careful about the unknown risk of developing a severe allergic reaction and balance the risk versus benefit. I don't think this is a reason not to get the vaccination at all, but it's just something to be aware of. So my last slide, in summary, 2 simple messages. Protect yourself. Look, we've all made mistakes. We've all, you know, when you showed that slide on the restaurants about, you know, how many of you have been to restaurants? Just outside or inside? How often have you been around other people without wearing your mask? How many people have you seen around you without wearing masks? We know about politicians, you know, from the mayor of Austin to governors to other people who came out and said, don't be around others, and then at parties, weddings, fly off. I mean, this applies to from the what's his name, Macron in France said, I probably did some stupid things. None of us are perfect. When you're around others, always wear a mask and distance. I would not eat in a restaurant inside, period. I would seriously consider purchasing an N95 mask with disposable filters. You can get them, why not? Why not protect yourself? It's not going to keep it. These are not on sale to medical professionals. I might tell you, talking about this mask here, for months now, one of our residents one of our neurology residents in the clinic, has been wearing this mask. He got it. You know, he didn't get it through the hospital. I got mine through the hospital. He purchased it online and he's been wearing it. Good for him. You know, I think if you can get one, get one. If you want to just use the K95, KN95, the Chinese version, it's probably better than not. And if you're not sure about it, wear a cloth mask over it. And of course, wash your hands frequently, but I don't think you have to worry too much about surface transmission. And of course, when you can, get vaccinated. So anyway, that's my talk.
Okay.
Done. Thank you.
And Debbie, I'm going to go ahead and finish up. And thanks, Dr. Zweig. I'm ready. How do you like this? I'm totally ready. With my
What is it, a K9? You see, it may not be a K9.
No, it's not, but it is pretty.
Right.
Okay.
And so what you could do is wear that over a K95, you see, and then you'll be more protected.
That's right. With our
Although, and I'll stop after this. Remember those hairdressers, the people, those 100 and how many people who got their hair cut by people who were infected, wore a mask. The stylist wore a mask, and they didn't spread it. So these other masks are effective to a degree. So anyway, thank you.
Okay, that was great, interesting, and ironically, I spoke with a friend last night whose daughter got the virus from her hairdresser the day before Thanksgiving, but who knows about masks? I don't know any details. Anyway, that was really interesting, a lot of information, great information to have. I'm gonna finish up with Debbie's permission. We're here today to do good things. This is a fundraiser and we need to raise funds to continue the research and treatment, not only for all the coronavirus issues, but also for all the other amazing work we do. You may or may not have heard about Derek Woods from Dallas. He was diagnosed with ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. ALS patients usually live about 18 to 24 months after diagnosis. Derek received stem cell treatment at Hadassah Hospital. His diagnosis was 5 years ago, and he is still here, happy to be alive. That's right here up down the street from y'all, Dallas, Texas, not so far away. And one other case really quickly I love to talk about, Stuart Greenberg, who's a Florida attorney. He was diagnosed with stage 4 metastatic melanoma in the stomach, and he went to 3 of the finest institutions in the United States and was given a prognosis of 3 months to live. He was told to go home and put his affairs in order. And a friend of theirs called doctors at Hadassah, Dr. Michal Lotem, who is fabulous. She has a treatment where she creates a personalized vaccine or an individualized vaccine for patients. The Greenbergs went to Israel. Within 5 minutes of talking to Dr. Lotem, they had hope. That diagnosis with the death sentence for 3 months was in March 2012, 8 years and 9 months ago. Today, Stuart has no evidence of disease, and he is happy, living a great life. 75% of the patients who receive this personalized treatment live and be well. I shared those stories with you today and the corona information for a reason, to remind you why your philanthropy is needed and appreciated. For those of you who are not yet annual donors, I am personally inviting you to step up and do that today. We have High Society, which is a minimum annual commitment of $180. That is 50 cents a day. And I would venture to say there's probably not, I hope there's no one on the call that can't do that. It's so doable. The next level for annual giving is the Silver High Society, $360 minimum annual commitment, $1 a day. And Hadassah can bill you automatically. You can pay with a check, your stocks, whatever. And then we have the Keepers of the Gate, minimum annual donation of $1,000. That's $2.74 a day, or $83.33 a month. And as the National Keepers of the Gate chair, I would love to see more keepers in our region, and especially in Shreveport. Shreveport has got one Keeper of the Gate, and I want to applaud Debbie Glenn. That is leadership by example, and Debbie has been a keeper for a long time, and you have one High Society member, Bert Muslow, and we thank both of them so much But I'm telling you today, it is time that we have more than one keeper and more than one high society member from Shreveport. I'm asking you today to consider doing that. You can put a note in the chat box. You can unmute yourself. Please interrupt me and tell me you want to do this. The $18 that you paid to register today, we will make that count as your first payment towards that high society. That's a 10th of the way there. And you can email me. You can, Esther Freedman, if you'll type in www.hadassah.org/donate or put lblock@hadassah.org. I appreciate that. If you're an annual donor, you should know you can designate your gift to go to one of 4 places. We have Hadassah's Greatest Needs, Hadassah Medical Organization, that includes all our research in the hospitals, Youth Aliyah scholarships for our children at risk, and then Young Judea scholarships. And I also just want to close and tell you about an exciting opportunity. We are renovating the round building with our 360 Degrees of Healing campaign. We have a very generous donor who has offered to match dollar for dollar up to $650,000 for any pledge and payment made by December 31st. And today we've raised about $550,000. Need your help to reach that full amount. So please consider that as well. But please don't make that $18 the only thing you do for Hadassah. You're going to feel good about this, I promise. Every single gift, large or small, is so needed and very, very appreciated. If you want to add to your $18 that you paid when you registered, let us know. Debbie, thank you for inviting me. I've been trying to get to Shreveport for years. Finally got here at least via Zoom, and I still want to come in person. Everybody stay safe, wear a mask, wash your hands, do what the doctor said. And I think now, Debbie, are you going to open up for questions? And
Yes.
if anybody wants to interrupt and say they want to make a pledge or type something in the chat box, please do.
Your questions can be dedicated to the person that you want to ask, either Linda Freedman Block or Dr. Richard Zweig. So please ask questions.
I have a question for Richard. The slide you put up that showed the incidence of the corona between Israel, UAE, any reasons given why it was lower in the UAE? Or Israelis are more sociable?
Maybe. I have no idea why. Maybe some of it could have to do with testing as well, and I don't know what percentage of tested positive in the 2 places. One thing that's interesting is that the fellow that was being interviewed was from Bahrain, and Bahrain is not UAE, they're neighboring, but Bahrain has one of the highest per capita rates in the whole world, higher than Israel's. So why should Bahrain be so high and UAE be much lower? I don't know. I don't know.
Hmm.
I want to tell you also, just one little tidbit. Israel was the first hospital in the world to be testing every week all the doctors and nurses. They were having the test. They didn't do that around the world, but that was just one other thing that Israel is doing to make sure and provide the best care possible.
I was wondering about the vaccine situations. This is for Dr. Zweig. You would advise getting the vaccine is having the benefits outweighing the risks. Is that?
Absolutely. If you've had an anaphylactic reaction before, where you have either to an animal, to a pet, to something you've eaten, if you're very allergic, if you've had a situation where you own an EpiPen because of reactions that you might have had, then you might want to think twice, or at least be monitored for half an hour afterwards to make sure you don't get the reaction. But that's pretty rare. I don't have the number of people who have been vaccinated so far, but I know that it's all over the country now. Healthcare professionals have been getting it, and and I think there've been 5 cases in the United States, something like that, which isn't zero, but it's a very, very small percentage.
It's good to know.
I really enjoyed your presentations. Thank y'all. So I went to LSU in Baton Rouge, and so a bunch of us who live in Houston Zoom every week right now, and we were talking about masks. And one of them's husband is Carl Schmulin, who's a doctor of gastroenterology here, although he's pretty much retired. Anyway, he grew up in Baton Rouge, and one of the things he was saying when we were talking about masks, because they're talking about wearing bandanas and all these things that you're like, how could that possibly help? If you don't have a N95 or a KN95 mask, he said, if you put the mask you have on and then you blow and you can feel it on your hands, then that mask is not as helpful to you as you might think. So that's a little trick he said that we should be doing if we don't have an N95 or KN95 mask. And in that case, you should at least double mask or put a filter or something in, is what he was suggesting. Would you agree?
Absolutely, yes.
So if we can't get an N95, we can put on two of another kind.
Yeah, but again, they're not hard to get. If you do any shopping online, or if your family members do, they're abundant. What's hard is going to the FDA website and finding that mask to make sure it still has the approval of the FDA. It's very unfriendly, the FDA website, in finding it. It could take you half an hour to get to the right screen. But having said that, again, you could always buy one, wear it, and wear a cloth mask over it. And then you'll be a little safer.
Okay.
It has several layers.
If you're going to be buying on Amazon, I got to throw in another little pitch. Go to smile.amazon.com and
Smile?
smile.amazon.com and do your ordering, and be sure to select Hadassah, the Women's Zionist Organization of America, Inc. as your charity of choice. You never have to change it again, but you can change it again if you like to. Anyway, once you do that, a small percentage comes in. I think we make, I don't know, maybe $11,000, $12,000 to every year by your shopping. So please continue to shop and do it with us in mind.
Yep. Sounds like a good suggestion. Sounds like good advice, because it not only benefits the user of whatever they're buying, but it benefits Hadassah, which is something that we all want to benefit. At any rate, are there any more questions?
I just wanted to comment or ask, we are still wiping down groceries, everything that comes into this house, because while you said it's not as common to go on a surface, you just demonstrated that some particles do get through. Some, you know, if the stocker in the grocery is sneezing, or the carry out, and the person who selected the groceries, and the person who brings them and puts them in my car when I do my curbside pickup, then, I mean, we are still wiping down everything that comes in. And do you do that, doctor?
You know, we used to. I could ask Sarah, she's online, my wife.
Okay, Sarah, do y'all do that?
Are you wiping down? I can say that I think that it's not as important. How about the mail? You wait, you let it sit outside for a day. You let the groceries that aren't perishable.
Mail? Did you ask about the mail?
Yeah, I mentioned the mail also.
My husband wipes that down too.
Goodness.
I don't think it hurts to do it, certainly. It's probably not necessary to go to that full extent. I mean, again, wash your hands when I'm in the clinic, by all means, not only in between patients, but often multiple times, even with the same patients. You know, where they come from, some nursing home, I'm always washing my hands. I get home, I'm washing my hands. But one thing I'm not doing is at first I get home, I take off my clothes and jump in the shower. You know, again, I'm not treating COVID patients. I'm in a clinic seeing people that come in with Parkinson's disease, none who have active COVID, but their roommates might, or some of them have had COVID a few weeks ago. Am I getting undressed and putting my clothes in the wash immediately? Not anymore. Maybe I should, but and maybe I've just been lucky. So I'm not quite as careful with surfaces as I might have been at first. And it looks like that's not a common way it spreads, but does it mean it never gets spread that way? Of course not. So by all means, wash your hands and do the easy things. you know?
It's always there.
Yeah.
It's always there. Yeah, yeah. Well, any more questions for our presenters? Well, again, I want to thank both Dr. Zweig and Linda Freedman Block for giving us some very vital and calming information. I can't say that it's quite reached the silver lining phase yet, but it's heading in that direction. And I want to wish you all well. And I want to thank all the people who are in attention today. I think it was a lovely happening. And I will be sending thank you notes to everybody. And it's very much appreciated. And thank you again. And I think that I want to thank the two rabbis, Rabbi Feibel and Rabbi Jana, for being in on the production of this presentation. And I wish you well, and wish you will join us at other Hadassah meetings as they come.
I see Elizabeth.
Yeah.
Hey,
Bye.
Thanks.
okay. Thanks.
Bye. Thanks again. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hello. I didn't have my sound or my video on. I've had earphones on watching all the time. It's been a
Oh,
wonderful presentation.
There you are.
Well, thanks.
Yes.
Good to see you. And I know
Thank you
Shreveport-
so much.
Yeah, and I just realized Shreveport, during my presidency, when there was a group trip to Shreveport, one of your community members was a guest at Hadassah Hospital for a couple of weeks, I believe. Isn't that,
Yes.
was it the
That's
pastor,
correct.
Pastor Tom? No, is that the name? Who was that?
Tim
Tim.
Karskaden.
That's
And it was the young man was his associate pastor. His name was John West. And yes, he was his first time he was in Hadassah, and it saved his life.
I know that.
He
And
had
so-
and actually it was an understudy. And he realized he was in Hadassah Hospital. And he realized when he saw all of the names of the contributors, that was the only reason why that hospital existed, and it saved his life.
So we need you guys to help out with that.
It was understanding. Yes,
Right.
yes. So
I
he
just
became an
remember.
associate member as well. And when
I know.
he came back to Shreveport, he's a
I know
Yeah,
he's
that
a
was-
supporter, definitely a supporter. It just hit me. I just realized, wait a minute, I just remembered. Anyway, thanks, Rabbi Jana. She said Pastor Tim also. Yeah. Anyway, so
yes.
y'all do have a personal connection to the hospital from Shreveport.
Very much so. Very much. Elizabeth, are you in Dallas or still in Shreveport?
I'm in Dallas. I came here and I grabbed my phone with my earplugs and
Good.
rushed over here to be on the meeting. I didn't want to miss it.
I love
But thank you so
Glad
much.
you- I'm glad you did. I'm glad you did.
And Linda Block and Dr. Swag and everybody, Rabbi Jana and Rabbi Feifel have putting all this together. Debbie, just bravo to you for pushing and through for a Zoom meeting. I'm envious. Now you're gonna have to teach me how to do this.
That's great. You know what I'm impressed with? Debbie, you've got people from Shreveport. You have people from I saw Debbie Rice from.
Yes, she's here.
I said, you've got Fort Worth. You've got Michelle Krugel from Austin. You've got Houston.
Oh, Michelle, I didn't know she was coming
Yes,
in.
ma'am, she is. You've got a lot
Yeah.
of support from the region. We love Shreveport from the region. Sandra Smith, incoming president, is here. Esther Freedman, who's been connected to y'all for late ages, from Conroe, Texas, if you want to add another city, so it sounds better. Anyway, but she's used in Dallas. You got Susie Abneri. We got a lot of love for Shreveport. I'm delighted to be here today. Y'all stay safe, everybody.
Thank you. You also, and most encouraging presentations, both. And I look forward to doing another such presentation in the not too distant future.
Great.
I only hope that we'll be able to meet in person at not too distant point ahead.
That sounds like a good plan to me.
Yeah.
Okay. It was great seeing everybody.